Che Guevara, the Doctor of the Revolution. Part 1. The Boy with the Silver Spoon and the Heavy Breath. Welcome to English Parchment. If you are ready to master English by diving into the lives of the most famous and controversial figures in history, you are in the perfect place. Please subscribe and like this video to help us bring more stories like this to you. Now think about a face. It is a face with a black beret, a determined look, and a messy beard. You have seen it on t-shirts, posters, and flags all over the world. But who was the man behind the image? Was he a heroic doctor who gave his life for the poor, or a cold-hearted soldier who loved the sound of a gun? Today, we are exploring the life of Ernesto Che Guevara, the man who walked away from a comfortable life in Argentina to fight in the jungles of Cuba and the mountains of Bolivia. Stay with us until the very end, because we are going to look at the moments that transformed a middle-class medical student into the most famous revolutionary in human history. Our story begins in June 1928 in Rosario, Argentina. Ernesto Guevara de la Serna was born into a wealthy, intellectual family. They were part of the upper middle class, a family of silver spoons who valued education, literature, and politics. From the outside, his life seemed perfect. But young Ernesto had a silent enemy that would follow him forever: asthma. When he was just 2 years old, he suffered his first severe attack. It was so bad that his parents moved the family to the mountains of Alta Gracia, hoping the dry air would save him. For the rest of his life, Ernesto would struggle to breathe, often gasping for air in the middle of a soccer game or a speech. But instead of letting this weakness stop him, it made him stubborn. He learned that if he wanted to survive, he had to fight harder than everyone else. Ernesto was a bookworm. Because his asthma often kept him in bed, he spent his time reading the works of Marx, Freud, and French literature. He was a brilliant student who was fascinated by the human body. He decided to study medicine at the University of Buenos Aires. He wanted to be a doctor, to heal people, and to understand the science of life. But he was also a young man with a restless soul. He felt that the walls of the classroom were too small for him. He wanted to see the real world, not just the world in his books. He wanted to know how other people lived, especially those who didn't have the comfort and safety of his own family. In his early 20s, Ernesto was a typical university student, but he had a secret desire for adventure. He and his friend Alberto Granado, a biochemist, decided to take a break from their studies. Their plan was simple. They would travel across South America on an old, leaking motorcycle they called La Poderosa, the powerful one. They didn't have much money, and they didn't have a map of the soul. They were just two young men looking for fun. But as the wheels of the motorcycle turned, the eyes of the young doctor began to open. He was about to see things that no medical book could explain. He was about to find a sickness that no medicine could cure. Part 2. The Motorcycle and the Awakening. The journey of the Motorcycle Diaries in 1952 was the turning point of Ernesto's life. As he and Alberto traveled through Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela, the silver spoon boy disappeared. He saw the reality of South America, the extreme poverty, the hunger, and the injustice. He visited copper mines in Chile, where workers were treated like slaves for the profit of foreign companies. He saw the ruins of Machu Picchu and realized that a great civilization had been destroyed by greed. But the most important stop was a leper colony in the Amazon. In the leper colony, Ernesto worked as a doctor, but he refused to wear gloves. He touched the patients, ate with them, and played soccer with them. He realized that these people were not just sick, they were forgotten by a society that only cared about wealth. He began to see that the poverty of the people was not an accident. It was a result of a system that kept the poor in the dark so the rich could stay in the light. He wrote in his diary, "I am not the person I was before. This journey has changed me forever." He began to believe that a doctor could only do so much. He could heal a body, but he couldn't heal a society. For that, he thought, you needed a different kind of surgery. When he returned to Argentina, he finished his medical degree, but he was no longer interested in a private practice in Buenos Aires. He left again, traveling through Bolivia and Guatemala. In Guatemala, he witnessed a democratic government trying to give land back to the poor farmers. But he also saw that government being destroyed by a coup d'etat supported by the United States. This event made him angry. He realized that if the poor wanted to change their lives, they would have to fight against the most powerful forces in the world. He met a group of Cuban exiles who spoke about a man named Fidel Castro. They called Ernesto Che, an Argentine slang word that means friend, or hey you. The name stuck. Che moved to Mexico City, where he worked as a doctor in a hospital. He was living a quiet life, but his heart was on fire. One night in 1955, he was introduced to a tall, charismatic man with a loud voice and big dreams. Fidel Castro. Fidel was planning to return to Cuba with a small army to overthrow the dictator, Fulgencio Batista. They talked for the entire night. Fidel saw a brilliant mind, and Che saw a man of action. Che didn't care about the risks. He joined the group as the expedition's doctor. He was ready to trade his stethoscope for a rifle. He was ready to follow Fidel into the mouth of the lion. The expedition was a disaster from the start. In November 1956, 82 men crowded onto a small, leaking yacht called the Granma. The boat was designed for 12 people. They were seasick, hungry, and exhausted. When they finally reached the shores of Cuba, the army was waiting for them. Most of the men were killed or captured in the first few days. Only a small group, including Fidel, Raúl Castro, and Che, escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Che was wounded in the neck. He lay on the ground, gasping for air, clutching a box of medicine in one hand and a box of bullets in the other. He chose the bullets. In that moment, the doctor died, and the revolutionary was born. Part 3. The War in the Mountains. The Sierra Maestra Mountains became the school where Che learned the art of guerrilla warfare. For 2 years, the small group lived in the jungle, sleeping on the ground and eating whatever they could find. Che's asthma was a constant torture. He would often have to be carried by his men or stay behind because he couldn't breathe. But he never complained. His discipline was legendary. He became known as the toughest commander in the rebel army. He was a perfectionist who expected his men to be as dedicated as he was. He taught them how to read, how to clean their guns, and how to fight for an idea, not just for a victory. Che was not just a soldier, he was a teacher. He set up a radio station called Radio Rebelde to talk to the Cuban people. He built small hospitals and schools in the mountains for the local farmers, the campesinos. He won their hearts because he treated them with respect. He showed them that the revolution was for them. But he was also a man of steel. He believed that betrayal was the greatest sin. He executed spies and deserters with his own hand. He believed that in a revolution there is no room for weakness. This dark side of Che is what makes him so controversial today. He was a man of great compassion for the poor, but he was also a man of absolute, cold violence against his enemies. By 1958, the rebel army was growing. Fidel realized that Che was his most brilliant strategist. He promoted Che to the rank of Comandante. Che led a column of soldiers across the island, traveling through swamps and forests to reach the city of Santa Clara. This was the Gordian knot of the war. If they could take Santa Clara, they could take Cuba. The city was defended by thousands of soldiers and an armored train full of weapons. Che had only a few hundred men, but he had a plan that would change the history of the world. In December 1958, Che's men used a bulldozer to derail the armored train. The battle was intense and bloody. Che moved through the streets like a ghost, directing his men and ignoring the bullets. When the train fell, the morale of Batista's army collapsed. On January 1st, 1959, Batista fled the country. Che and his men marched into Havana as heroes. The world was watching. A group of bearded rebels had defeated a modern army supported by a superpower. Che Guevara was now a global celebrity. He was the brain of the revolution, a man whose face was on the front page of every newspaper. But the hardest part was just beginning. Winning a war is easy. Building a new world is much harder. In the early days of the new government, Che was given a dark task. He was made the commander of the La Cabaña fortress, where he oversaw the trials and executions of former Batista officials. Hundreds of men were put against the wall and shot. Che argued that these revolutionary tribunals were necessary to cleanse the country and prevent a counter-revolution. To his supporters, he was a hero of justice. To his enemies, he was a butcher. This period of his life remains a deep shadow on his legacy. He believed that a revolutionary must become a cold killing machine motivated by pure hate against the enemies of the people. This transformation from the kind doctor to the executioner is the great mystery of Che Guevara. Part 4. The Man of the State. After the war, Che became one of the most powerful men in Cuba. He was the head of the National Bank and the Minister of Industries. It was a strange sight. The man who had lived in the jungle for 2 years was now sitting in an office, wearing a suit and talking about economics. He signed the Cuban money with a simple name, Che. He wanted to show that he didn't care about the prestige of his office. He was a man of action, and he wanted to transform Cuba into a socialist paradise. He traveled the world, meeting with leaders like Mao Zedong and Khrushchev, trying to build a new alliance against the West. Che's vision for Cuba was based on the new man. He believed that people should work for the good of the society, not for money. He tried to abolish the idea of profit and competition. Every weekend, he would go to the fields to cut sugarcane or work at a construction site. He wanted to set an example. He believed that if the leaders worked like the common people would work harder. But his economic policies were a failure. He was a doctor and a soldier, not an economist. The Cuban economy began to struggle. and the relationship with the United States became more and more dangerous, leading to the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis. As the years passed, Che began to feel frustrated. He was a permanent rebel. He hated the bureaucracy of the government. He felt that the revolution was becoming stale. He saw that in other parts of the world, in Africa, Asia, and South America, people were still living in poverty and injustice. He couldn't stay in a comfortable office while others were still fighting. He began to disagree with the Soviet Union, accusing them of being as imperialist as the United States. He felt like an outsider in his own government. He started to plan his final act. He wanted to take the fire of the revolution to the rest of the world. In 1965, Che disappeared. He wrote a famous farewell letter to Fidel, saying that he was leaving to fight in other lands of the world. He gave up his Cuban citizenship, his military rank, and his position in the government. He even gave up his family. He left his wife and children behind to follow his destiny. He first went to the Congo in Africa, trying to lead a revolution there. But it was a disaster. The local rebels didn't want to follow a white man from Argentina, and the jungle was a nightmare for his asthma. He returned to a secret location, feeling defeated but not broken. He was looking for one last battleground. He chose Bolivia. Bolivia was the heart of South America. Che believed that if he could start a revolution there, it would spread to Argentina, Peru, and Brazil. He entered the country in disguise, with a shaved head and glasses. He looked like an old businessman, not a legendary warrior. He set up a base in the remote jungle of the Nyancawazu region. He had only 50 men. He thought the Bolivian miners and farmers would join him, but he made a fatal mistake. He didn't understand the local culture. The Bolivian people were afraid of him. They saw him as a foreign invader, not a savior. He was alone in the mountains, surrounded by an army supported by the CIA. The trap was closing. Part 5. The Last Stand in Bolivia. The Bolivian campaign of 1967 was a slow, painful tragedy. Che and his small group were hunted like animals. They had no food, no medicine for his asthma, and no support from the outside world. Che's diary from this time is a record of incredible suffering. He describes the hell of the jungle, the thirst, and the exhaustion. His men were dying one by one. He was gasping for air, unable to walk, but he refused to surrender. He believed that the example of his struggle was more important than his life. He wanted to show the world that a man could stay true to his convictions until the very end. In October 1967, the end finally came. Che and his few remaining men were trapped in a ravine called Quebrada del Euro. They fought for hours against hundreds of Bolivian soldiers. Che was wounded in the leg, and his gun was destroyed by a bullet. He was captured and taken to a small, mud-brick schoolhouse in the village of La Higuera. He was covered in dirt, his hair was matted, and his clothes were in rags. But the soldiers who guarded him said he still looked like a king. He refused to answer their questions, looking at them with a calm and terrifying gaze. He knew he was going to die. The order came from the Bolivian government, with the silent agreement of the CIA. Execute him. They didn't want a trial. They didn't want him to have a platform to speak. On October 9, 1967, A young sergeant named Mario Terán entered the schoolroom. He was shaking with fear. Che looked at him and said his final words. "I know you have come to kill me. Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." Terán fired, and Che Guevara fell. The man was dead, but the myth was just beginning. The Bolivian army took his body to a nearby town, where they put it on display for the world to see. The photos of Che's dead body were intended to show the world that the revolution was over. But they had the opposite effect. In the photos, Che looked like a fallen Christ. He looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. The image moved millions of people. He became a martyr for the youth of the 1960s. In Paris, Berlin, and New York, students carried his face on their banners. He became the symbol of rebellion against the system. The man who had failed in Bolivia had succeeded in becoming an eternal icon. His body was buried in a secret grave under a landing strip, and it wasn't found for 30 years. In 1997, Che's remains were discovered and returned to Cuba. He was buried in a massive monument in Santa Clara, the city of his greatest victory. Hundreds of thousands of people attended the ceremony. Fidel Castro gave a speech calling Che a gorilla of time. But the real legacy of Che Guevara is not in a monument. It is in the paradoxical way we remember him. He is the most recognized face on earth, yet very few people know his real story. He has become a brand, a symbol of cool that is used to sell everything from coffee to sneakers. The man who hated capitalism has become its most profitable product. Part 6. The Paradox of the Hero. How should we look at Che Guevara today? To some, he is a saint, a man of pure idealism who sacrificed everything for the poor. They see his face and think of freedom, justice, and courage. They remember his speeches at the United Nations, where he spoke for the voiceless nations of the world. They see him as a romantic figure who died for a dream. To them, he is the doctor of the world, a man who tried to heal the sickness of humanity with the only tools he had. But to others, he is a villain, a fanatic who loved violence and hated democracy. They point to the executions at La Cabaña and his support for nuclear war during the missile crisis. They see his face and think of tyranny, blood, and failure. They remember the families who fled Cuba because of his policies. To them, he is a terrorist who wanted to destroy the world to build a fantasy. Both of these views are true. Che was a man of absolute contradictions. He was a poet and an executioner. He was a doctor and a warrior. He was a man who loved humanity, but was often cold to human beings. For those of us learning English, Che Guevara's life is a masterclass in the vocabulary of conviction. Words like sacrifice, integrity, utopia, and resistance are part of his story. He was a man who lived his life with a singular purpose. Whether you love him or hate him, you cannot ignore him. He changed the course of the 20th century. He showed that one person armed with an idea and a rifle can shake the world. He taught us that the revolution is not an apple that falls when it is ripe. You have to make it fall. Che once wrote to his children, "Above all, always be capable of feeling deeply any injustice committed against anyone, anywhere in the world. This is the most beautiful quality of a revolutionary." This sentence is perhaps the best way to understand him. He was a man moved by empathy, but he chose a path of violence to express it. This is the tragedy of his life. He wanted a world without hunger, but he left behind a world of division. He wanted to be a new man, but he was a man of his time, a time of war, ideology, and absolute choices. As we look at the world today, Che Guevara is still with us. He is in the protests on the streets, he is in the books of history, and he is on the shirts of the youth. He is a ghost that refuses to leave. He reminds us that the problems he fought against, poverty, injustice, and greed, are still here. He challenges us to ask ourselves, what do I believe in? What am I willing to sacrifice for? He doesn't give us the answers, but he forces us to ask the questions. He is the eternal rebel, the boy with the silver spoon who chose the heavy breath of the jungle over the comfortable air of the palace. Thank you so much for joining us for this epic journey on English Parchment. Exploring the life of Che Guevara is a way to understand the complex history of our world and to improve your English through the stories that matter. If you found this video insightful and helpful, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us create more deep dive stories for our community. What do you think about Che's legacy? Is he a hero or a villain in your eyes? Tell us in the comments. Keep dreaming, keep reading, and keep learning. We will see you in the next story.